or perhaps Heritage Quest. And in one case, I'm going to discuss a supplemental schedule that was done by the federal government in the 1890 census. We're not going to be discussing today other censuses that are out there. You may have heard or have some experience with school censuses or state census records. But we're not covering that. Today, we're just going to be focusing on federal census records. So, that being the case, let's start with the earliest history of how the census came about. And many of this will be old hat to some of us, but it's good to kind of revisit some of the lessons we learned in high school history classes. I think that the federal census really started back prior to the Revolution, the American Revolution, with this famous phrase, no taxation without representation. And you can imagine how our ancestors just detested the idea of paying taxes for things that they did not receive the benefit from. And of course, after the Revolution and we gained our independence, then it was really up to our founding fathers to hammer together how are we going to institute this newfound freedoms that we have. Specifically, how many people live in my congressional district that I'm representing in Washington, and what kind of taxes might we legitimately raise in order to support the federal government. So, starting in 1887 with the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, our founding fathers were debating high and low in regards to whether or not persons of color or non-white population should be counted for census purposes. And our founding fathers argued and debated about this for years. And finally, it evolved into what was called the Three-Fifths Compromise. And again, that's in 1787. And if you wanted to read this clause number 3 in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, it clearly states that 3/5 of all other persons would be counted. This is an awful long, drawn-out statement, and
Okay.
to me, it's
Joe,
yes.
I'm sorry. This is Alicia.
Uh-huh.
Our screen isn't changing, or should we be on this title slide, or are
Well,
you a few
let
slides
me
in?
let me click. Now, I am using the arrows down at the bottom. Is your screen not advancing?
No, and Valerie's isn't either, and I don't know if anybody else's
Okay, how about that?
isn't.
Is that working now?
No, I just changed it on mine. Yeah, everyone's still on the title slide, and you are clicking on the arrows at the bottom on the screen.
Arrows on the bottom left of the
Yes.
screen. Yeah?
Yes.
Is that not
Hmm.
working?
No, for some reason it's not.
Oh no. What do I do?
Yeah, we can all change it, but it shouldn't be that way.
Well, shoot. I don't know what to tell you. Um, I could, perhaps I guess I could just tell you to advance the screen, but
Okay, for time's sake, yeah, just let me know, everybody. I'm gonna advance it, and y'all let me know if it changes for you all. Does
Okay,
everybody see the picture? Okay, I just changed my screen. Is it changing on anybody else's? Okay, I tell you what we're gonna do, and hopefully,
change
Joe,
it.
we don't lose. I think.
Try advancing it another slide. Maybe it's not working on mine. That's not working on my end. Oh, poo.
Here, I'm gonna do some and see if it's going to. Okay, now Joe.
Yeah.
Now try to advance it.
Are you going through anything?
No.
All right, let me try this one then. Nothing?
Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing and then we'll start over again. Okay, and let's see if that makes a difference.
Okay. Sorry about this, everybody. Technical problems. But trust me, we'll get through it.
Okay, Joe, you want to try it again?
Uh, let's see here. How's that? Is everybody seeing that?
No.
Holy moly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll just have everybody advance it on their own since they can do that. There's something somewhere in one of the settings that's messed up, and it would take me a bit to be able to find it. So if everybody's good with you
Well,
just saying ding or change, we'll all hit the arrow.
yeah,
Yeah.
you'll figure out. And what I'll do is I'll just say click, 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 and you guys just follow along with me, okay?
Okay. How
Will that
many
work?
clicks in should it be now from the title
Uh,
slide?
well, you should be looking at an old picture of a riot during the revolution. People,
Okay.
guys
So it should
banging a
be just
drum.
on slide 2, right?
Yep, slide 2. That's it. Slide
Slide
2.
2, everybody.
Go to slide 2.
And Joe will say click when we need to change it.
Yeah. And
See, it's called good old audience participation, right, guys?
I love it. I love it.
Thank
Okay.
you all for being so cooperative. Y'all are awesome. All right, I don't know.
God bless you. Okay, so again, our founding fathers were trying to hammer together the Constitution, and they came up with the Three-Fifths Compromise. Now, the gist of the Three-Fifths Compromise was Southern states wanted to count the slaves in their state. By doing so, it would result in greater representation, greater power in Washington, and hopefully a greater return on any tax revenue they generate. Conversely, those in the northern states were opposed to the thought of counting slaves so that they could try to maintain their power base. So the fundamental thought is that in 1787, the founding fathers came up with this Three-Fifths Compromise. And if you click and go to slide 3, let's see if we can get there. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. Slide 3. You'll see this long statement. No, stop it. Stop it. Okay. Slide 3. Representatives and taxes shall be apportioned among the states. And you'll see that at the conclusion of this long statement that 3/5 of all other persons would be counted. Now, don't presume, as some people do, that persons of color were considered 3/5 value of a white person. That was not the intention of what this clause was meant for. It was simply to count 3/5 of non-white population. Okay, let's move on. As we know, the 1790 was the very first federal census taken. Now, if you have a pencil and paper handy, you might want to jot down this date. January 1st, 1808. January 1st, 1808, the Slave Non-Importation Law goes into effect. That's Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. This means that it made it illegal for anyone to import slaves to the United States. It also helped drive up the value of the slave-owning property. Now, the debate in regards to slavery can be seen in the 1820 census, and if everyone clicks, they'll be at this 1820 view of the New York City slide. Now you see clearly it states that they're counting free persons of color. And if any of you have seen 12 Years a Slave, you can imagine how John Green or Samuel Barber listed here could have very easily been one of those persons that were captured and taken into slavery down south. I searched and searched all over in the slaveholding states for an 1820 census that clearly lists any free persons of color. I didn't see any, but I do know that there were some in the South. Another date that you'll want to remember is February 2nd, 1833. Kentucky passes a Slave Non-Importation Act. Thus, slave owners could travel with their slaves out of state. They could purchase slaves out of state and come back into Kentucky, but slave dealers could not bring slaves into Kentucky for sale. And then another date to remember is September 18th, 1850, where the Congress enacts something called the Fugitive Slave Act. And that's going to be discussed here very soon. So if you will take your mouse and click on slide number 5, you'll see that the slave schedule for 1850 Scott County. And again, we're on slide number 5. Now, if you notice, William Sutton here in the schedule is listed having 4 slaves, a male who's 40 years of age, a female 39, a female that's 4, and an infant, a 1-year-old male infant. I don't know for sure, but it looks as if this might be an intact family. I would hope so. And by the way, William Sutton, for some of you may not know this, he happens to be the author of Kentucky's Vital Record Law. So if you have difficulty understanding birth, death, and marriage records in the early late 1850s, he had something to do with that. Now, getting back to that Fugitive Slave Act that was passed a year prior, you'll notice On column number 6, it's kind of hard to read, but column number 6, there is a statement whether or not this fugitive, that slave is a fugitive from the state. And if you're researching slave schedules, you might notice that one of those slaves was marked as fugitive. And this is where county sheriffs and federal marshals just wanted to keep an eye on who's who, who may they be looking for if a slave goes rogue on us. Okay, so another non-population schedule that we may be familiar with, if you go to slide 7, is agricultural censuses. And let's see if my markings will show up there. Okay, slide 7 is an agricultural census. Those numbers 1 through 21 shows the column headings. They deal with our ancestors, many of whom were farmers, and you'll see that it lists the value of the improved and unimproved property on the farm. That's unimproved land was column 3. I believe column 4 deals with the value of the whole farm or property. Column 5 deals with the value of the machinery and other farm implements. Columns 6 through maybe 15 or 17 deal with various counts of livestock. So they counted numbers of cows and horses and sheep, hogs. They counted mules and mares, all of the livestock on the farm. And then on the right-hand side of the schedule, the census taker counted types of produce grown on the farm, whether it's bales of cotton or wool, bushels of wheat and corn and oats and barley, even gallons of honey if they were producing that. I've seen some agricultural censuses taken in the Pacific Northwest, where there's heavy timber industries, that counted board feet of lumber that were cut. And some schedules in the northeast of the United States, they counted how many bushels of mackerel and salmon were caught by the fishermen. So I think these agricultural censuses really are quite regional. And again, since most of our ancestors were farmers, I think it would encourage us to look to see what kind of work they were in and how much they were producing. I think that gives a better description of their life. Now, there's a couple of important notes when you're thinking of researching agricultural censuses. Not every farm was included on these schedules. In 1850, small farms that produced less than $100 worth of product annually were not included. And by 1870, farms that were less than 3 acres in size or produced less than $500 worth of products were not included. So small little farms or acreage weren't going to be there. But many were. Now let's go on to the next slide, number 8. And if you would, you'll see a sample of a manufacturing schedule for Jefferson County, 1850. And you'll see on the left-hand side of this schedule, John Sinclair, the middle name there, was a carpet manufacturer. And he had about $2,000 worth of capital invested in his enterprise. The next columns, you'll see how much stock was on hand in terms of dry stuffs and cotton bales and rag balls and buckets of coal. All that was valued at about $800. It shows that the company was hand powered, so he must have had a number of carpet looms working. Columns 8 and 9 is interesting. It shows that he had 5 male and 5 female employees. And what's really interesting, I think, is the next 2 columns. How much was paid to the male employees? $50 per month, as opposed to $15 for the female employees. Now, when I've taught this class in person, I've gotten some really bad stares and some snickers and sneers, and people were threatening to throw rotten vegetables at me for this fact. And I'm sorry. I really am. I'm sorry. The wage disparity back then was horrendous as compared to today. But to be fair, I'm not sure how many hours a week those 5 female employees worked to get paid the $15. I don't know. So anyway, I think this is an interesting schedule, and as you can understand, most manufacturing schedules would have appeared in the larger urban settings. But heck, even small towns had blacksmiths and produced horseshoes and ironwork. So if your ancestor was found on a census owning a business or owning a farm, consider looking in these manufacturing and agricultural censuses. And these two are, I think these manufacturing schedules are, I know they're on microfilm through the Kentucky Department of Libraries. I'm not sure if they're available on Ancestry. So you may want to check Ancestry and see. But I know the large cities certainly had those. Now, thus far we've been talking about non-population schedules. Meanwhile, as the census continues to grow, there are an influx of immigrants pouring into the United States. And starting in 1850, as you may know, the census now began naming who's living in these households, and their ages, and the place they were born. And as censuses continued to evolve, more and more questions were being asked. Well, we get to a point where so much data is being collected that a method had to be created to develop the statistical abstracts of this data. And in the 1890s, technology comes to the rescue. If you click on slide 9, you'll see a diagram or an image of something called a pantograph. And the census staff would take this machine, and if you click on slide 10, you'll see that they would take a card like this and put it on the machine and stamp holes in it. What would happen then is that these tabulating cards would then be put on something called a Hollerith card reader machine, or a Hollerith tabulating machine. Click on slide 11 and you'll see one. So they would put this punched card on this lower level of this device and lower the handle, and little pins in that upper container would slide through the holes and connect with a little little tiny thin mercury bath in that lower level, and there would be an electrical charge that would then be registered on these dials that you see above it. Now, this wouldn't help us in terms of genealogical value, but of statistical abstract work, this was a huge, huge benefit to our legislators and lawmakers. Moving right along, if you go to slide 12, you'll see that in March of 1902, the Census Bureau is established, a full-fledged, fully functioning, supposedly fully funded office within the Department of Commerce and Labor. And more and more immigrants are pouring into the United States as we speak. Now, at this time in America's history, there are a lot of veterans from the Civil War and federal government employees that are filing for pension benefits. And some of these pension applicants are not completely honest, let's just say, with whether or not they're entitled to a pension. And so, due to the pressures of this, in 1907, the Federal Service and Age Pension Act was modified to require proof of age. Now, the result of that was that this newly established Census Bureau is beginning to be flooded with requests for them to prove that this pension applicant is of a certain age and is therefore entitled to his pension. And one of the staff members of the Bureau at that time was a fellow by the name of Robert Russell. And in 1916, Robert Russell, and if you click on slide 13, you'll see that Robert Russell received one of the first of 6 patents for something that indexes federal census records. And this helped. This was a necessity born out of this invention was really born out of necessity, since they were being just flooded with these requests for proofs of age, and this would be a way in which census takers or census employees can find out and answer those questions much more quickly. Now, let's move on a little bit further. In 1921, on January 10th, if you click on slide 14, you'll see that there was a disastrous fire in Washington, and that just was so terrible. The New York Times here claims that all the censuses were destroyed, and now we know, thankfully, that it really was only the 1890 census that was destroyed. Click on slide 15. Well, no, it's not there. All right, never mind. Don't click on the next slide. You'll see that it was a disastrous fire, and I can't imagine what life was like for us if those census records were gone. I mean, I don't know if family history research would have ever gotten off the ground if all those records truly were destroyed. Let's see what the next slide is, number 15. Now, as I mentioned, the 1890 census was destroyed, but as it happens, there was a supplement done during the 1890 census of veterans. And this did survive that fire. This is a slide from Kenton County, Ohio. The Veterans Census is available on Ancestry, and it lists the date of enlistment and discharge, and I think these will also include which war or conflict the veteran may have served in. So this could help if you have an ancestor who may have had a military record. So this is certainly a census that you'll want to pursue if you think your ancestor was in the military. Okay, now let's go on to, let's see, that was in 1921. In the mid-1920s, the Age Search Service was created within the Census Bureau. And this office, just all they do is research proofs of age, poring over these census records to do that. And again, this is to qualify in order to receive a railroad retirement pension or military service pension. In 1927, Remington Rand Corporation purchased the licensing rights from Robert Russell in his indexing system, and applies the trademark name of something that many of us are familiar with. It's called Soundex. So now the Remington Rand Corporation picks this up, and I guess the Rand Corporation perhaps is outsourced to do a lot of the Soundex indexing of the census. Then click on slide 16, and you'll see that in the stock market crash of '29, there were a lot of unemployed bookkeepers and accountants and bank tellers and insurance salesmen and all kinds of folks that were unemployed. 23% nationwide was the average unemployment rate. I can't imagine what a life in America would be like today if there was 23% unemployment. I think at worst, I think it got up to 10%. Thankfully, we're not that bad anymore. So anyway, there's a lot of people out of work now, and something is needing to be done about this. And if you click on the next slide, slide 17, you'll see that here President Roosevelt is signing into law the creation of the Social Security Administration and the Works Progress Administration, the creation of that. Now you could almost imagine one of the fellows standing behind Roosevelt. Maybe it's the fellow on the right who's the head of the Department of Labor, and he's wondering, my God, how am I going to get all these people back to work? And the fellow on the left, maybe he's the Secretary of the Interior, and he's saying, my goodness, I've got so many requests for people needing proofs of age. How am I going to answer all these questions? And it's like chocolate and peanut butter coming together in one big, beautiful thing. And these guys go in the hallway afterwards and said, I think we could work something out. And so I'm sure a lot of these unemployed bookkeepers and accountants were hired by the Census Bureau to do a lot of Soundex indexing. In the 1930s was also a time, if you go to the next slide, 18, in which the census was being microfilmed for the first time. The next slide, number 19, you'll see the title page to the 1860 census for Harrison and Hart County, Kentucky. And the question that was asked to me recently was, when were these censuses specifically microfilmed? And if you look on the title page, in the bottom right-hand corner, it's kind of hard to read, and I'm afraid to click on the next slide because it'll advance us too fast. But you'll see that the microfilm for Harrison and Hart County was microfilmed, was it in 1967? So now you can imagine that the census for Harrison and Hart County, 1860, was sitting on a shelf somewhere in an archive in Washington for some 60 years. And then there was this horrible fire in the Commerce Department. There was smoke damage and soot and horrible humidity and temperature changes that these census records were suffering for all these decades. Then there's the fire. And then after the censuses are rescued and saved and dried out, they're sitting on a shelf for another 40 years before they ever got microfilmed. So if anyone is wondering why it's so hard to read images of these census records now, you can explain that to anyone who asks. It wasn't until the 1960s that Kentucky's records were being microfilmed. So let's see what happens to the next slide. Here again in the 1930s, these folks are indexing the census at slide 20 and creating these Soundex cards. Let's see, slide 21 is a sample card from Estill County. Not sure which year this is. I think it might be the 1910 census. And this is what the age search service staff were consulting to answer those proofs of age questions. And then something really disastrous occurred in December of 1941. Next, well, let's back up the truck. Here's the 1940 census. I'm sorry, slide 22 is the 1940 census. These are actually the supplementary questions. And a lot of times we researchers forget that there were supplemental questions asked for those cited on lines 14, 29, 55, and 68 of the census. And one of the questions asked, if you look at the top right-hand corner, is whether or not that person had a Social Security card. A very important question to ask 5 years after the Social Security Act was passed. And there's other questions too in the supplemental questions that you may want to make note of and explore after we get done today. Okay, and then the year after that 1940 census was taken, and we all know too that that's the last census that's available to researchers, comes Pearl Harbor, slide number 23. And then when the United States was thrown into a world war of horrific proportion, you can imagine how important it was for anyone who was young enough to carry a rifle or work in an ammunition plant or collect scrap iron. It was a matter of survival that we fight this war. And so soundexing the census records was not all that important, as you can understand. Now, let's move on. Slide 24. In 1952, a man by the name of Roy Peel, who was the director of the Census Bureau, writes a letter to Wayne Grover, who was the archivist at the time, and proposes what's called the 72-year rule. That's why we're not able to see any census today after 1940. Now, it's interesting that this proposal was made in 1952. If you go to slide 25, you'll see that it wasn't until October of 1978 that the 72-year rule actually goes into effect. So you could thank Public Law number 95-416 as the reason for that 72-year privacy rule. That being said, one could assume that prior to 1978, one could go to the National Archives and get access to the 1950, 1960, and 1970 census records. Wouldn't that have been nice? I'm hoping they've been microfilmed, and I'm sure they have. But if there's anybody that has copies of those microfilms, man, you better guard them with your life. So anyway, let's move on. And as of now, because of that 72-year rule, it's not until April 1st of the year 2022 that the 1950 census will be released. So mark your calendars, boys and girls. April 1st, 2022 is when it'll come out. Now, to be sure, the primary purpose of the U.S. federal census is to enumerate its citizens for the purposes of taxation and representation. When we accurately determine the social, educational, economic, and public health needs of our community, state or nationwide, we can supposedly better apportion tax revenue and representation to Washington to address these needs. During the formative years of our nation, we're largely concerned with fighting off aggressors, both foreign and domestic. Let's stop at slide 25, please, wherever you are. Yeah, okay, here we go. Yeah, so in the early years, we're concerned with just surviving. And the names and occupations and educational attainment levels and marital statuses of our ancestors just wasn't necessary to know. It was beside the point. Now, with regard to non-population schedules, the federal government began to take note of its gross domestic product, as reflected in agricultural and manufacturing and even the slave schedules. Now, the big picture reason was to support the development of interstate commerce as well as international trade. Now, historians and sociologists may argue, and perhaps not so wildly, whether or not a nation can prepare itself adequately for war without an accurate picture of its agricultural and manufacturing capacity. And that's what the data from these schedules will provide. Now, 1850, the population schedule was the first to ask specifically about persons of color. Questions on subsequent enumerations regarding race helped fuel the debate in state legislatures across the country regarding interracial marriage and other things. So let's click on slide 27, and you'll see a fragment of the 1890 census that did survive. And you look at column number 4, where the census taker was specifically asked whether or not just whether they were white or black, but were they mulatto or quadroon or octoroon. Now, Japanese or Indian, Chinese. I mean, it's an amazing amount of personal detail that they were asking in this question found on the 1890 census. And you know, state legislators were really concerned about issues like this, and were instituting laws that would prevent interracial marriage. Let's see if we can go on to the next slide here and see what happens. In addition to that, in the 1870s, there were questions like here on column 18, whether or not citizens were deaf or blind or insane or idiotic. I may not want to admit it, but we've got ancestors that were, that fell into these categories. Some of them were quite sick, and some not to their own faults. And this helped fuel debates in state legislatures regarding sterilization of those that were deemed incapable or shouldn't have children, whether due to mental defect or criminality. So questions about eugenics was certainly in the public debate throughout the United States, not just in Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s. And then thanks to the federal census, we have gerrymandering. And this is the 4th Congressional District in Illinois. And it's just nuts how the state legislature in Illinois decided to redistrict to accommodate this congressperson. I don't understand how anyone living within the green is politically, economically, or educationally, or occupationally that much different than someone living right across the street from him or her. But to me, this is just nuts. But that's our way of government, federal government. So based on the federal census would determine whether or not the state is entitled to an additional congressional district. And if so, then it was up to the state to redraw its districts. And I think that's it. Very last slide is if you wanted to learn more about the federal census, you could visit those websites or download your copy of this document, History and Growth of the United States Census. It's a very long document, published in 1900, so I think it's an interesting document. And you could also read Dennis Zook's book, Research in Census Records, source guidebook for American genealogy. Well, in spite of the technical glitches, I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I'm prepared to look at any questions that are coming our way and trying to answer them. Okay, Leslie, what cities in Kentucky have the manufacturing schedules? Well, I know Jefferson County does, Louisville, Lexington, any of the larger urban cities, even Owensboro, Somerset, Bardstown, any town of any size that had a manufacturing base likely would have had a manufacturing schedule. Uh, is any other questions? Let's see. Thank you, Valerie, for making that link available for manufacturing schedules. Any comments or thoughts? I'm following along the comment stream here.